My name's Sydney Rankmore. I'm an associate planner with Rick and a board member on the APA San Diego chapter. With me here I have Bill Anderson. Bill is a longtime consultant with international and economic firms. He is the former director of the City Planning and Community Investment Department, and he's currently teaching at UCSD, and he's a fellow with the American Institute of Certified Planners. Bill, can we start off by just you telling us a little bit about yourself, your path to planning?
Okay. Well, I'm a San Diego native and grew up in this area, and got into planning. Well, got into observing how communities were different when we moved up to LA when I was a teenager, and noticed the difference up there compared to here. But then in college, also spent time as an exchange student in Copenhagen, and that was the first time living in a city that was very walkable and designed for moving about with more than just a car. Mm-hmm. And so started to observe the different cities that I lived in after that time in DC and Boston for graduate school, and got interested in cities that way, and urban planning. And then started off in Boston in my career, and then moved back to Southern California and back to San Diego.
Great. So what values do you think influence your choice of work in planning or jobs that you've taken on?
I value diversity, so cities that have diverse populations, but also diverse places, and probably because of that, I'm not as judgmental about a city has to be this particular format or form or design. I try to understand what makes a city different, and some of its history, some of it's the code of the topography, and some of it is their economic base and how that influences the type of city it's become, and then also the era in which the city really became a city, and the mostly transportation technology at the time, and how that's influenced how people live and what kind of communities they want to create.
You're kind of touching on this a little bit, but what are your kind of core beliefs or values that have been foundational to your planning work and you've integrated into your work?
Well, very much supportive of designing cities to be healthier places through better environments, and so the built environment, but certainly the natural environment, and also prosperous cities in terms of the economy being resilient, but also creating opportunities for a broad variety of people with different skill sets and backgrounds, and recognizing how that's important. And then equity. But the way I look at equity is creating cities that are more accessible to the people who live and visit the city, so they can access the different opportunities that are presented.
So thinking a little bit more broadly, more at the planning profession, how do you think that it has made a difference in our cities?
Well, planning is one of the few professions that is really charged with thinking long-term, and not just the 20-year horizon of a general plan in California, but beyond that, even a century in the future or more, and trying to understand what are the decisions that influence alternative outcomes, and evaluate maybe which approaches could lead to a better outcome. The challenge is, as being one of the few professions that think long-term, is incorporating the input and influencing the decisions of the broader public and the people who rightfully in a democratic society are making the selections upon the alternative ways of growing as a city, or preparing for the future, because some cities face declining population as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How do you think that the planning profession has changed over the years, or how have you seen it change through your career?
In my career, well, one is it does vary quite a bit based on the issues that different cities and different locations are facing. So when I started my career, even though I'm a Californian, I started in the Northeast, and there the issues were more related to trying to recover and reinvent the cities that were prominent cities 50 to 100 years ago and faced economic decline and risk, the Rust Belt cities, and having to reposition and to recover for a better future. So a lot of it was related to economic development in those contexts. Then coming back to California, where being in a growth region, a lot of the economy was more, planning was more about quality of life and maintaining quality of life, and how do you do that while you're growing, and are you growing too rapidly? And it was an era of growth management, because I was concerned that if we grew too rapidly, we would potentially destroy many of the attributes for why people love California.
Mm-hmm.
The profession itself, though, I think has changed it became much more aware, because of probably mistakes we made in the 50s and 60s, about the importance of planning with the community and people, and getting their input into the decision-making process, and issues related to injustices that can come about by strictly top-down planning. Major change also is related to technology, and how we use technology to apply planning, make decisions, and I think consequently lead to more multidisciplinary approaches to planning.
So what do you see as the most important issue that we're facing in California right now in planning?
Well, globally, including California,
Mm-hmm.
I do think the climate change and resilience is top of mind. It isn't top of mind of everybody that we work with in the public, because they have maybe more immediate issues
Mm-hmm.
to contend with. I think in California there's a recognition that it is an issue to address, but people have pocketbook issues about their families and their incomes, and the resilience and quality of their neighborhoods, and how they can afford to still live in California, or their children can afford to live here. And so I would say trying to reconcile the imperative to protect our environment and do so in a way while we can still prosper economically for more people, and make living here more affordable and healthy in the process.
Mm-hmm. So how can we in the planning profession and as individuals anticipate and respond to some of these challenges that you've mentioned, or others that arise in the future?
Talk to a lot of people and listen.
Mm-hmm.
And get various views into that process. Recognize the differences in context. And develop strategies that are focused on the context in which you're working and the outcomes you're trying to achieve. That's why I've never really been fond of the term best practices, because to me it's the appropriate practice for the context. What might be best in one situation may not be best in another.
So this is kind of similar, but do you have advice for maybe emerging planners or students kind of getting into the profession?
To learn about the other professions and fields that influence the outcomes of planning, or in fact implement plans. So understand finance, understand economics, land economics, how real estate is developed. But also, as I tell my class at UCSD, real estate is not the economy. It's a portion of the urban economy. It's the cup. The economy is the coffee or the tea that's in the cup. And so to be mindful of what it takes to maintain a diverse and resilient economic base. A lot of the cities that went through decline in the 50s and 60s and 70s, in the 1900s, they were among the largest cities in the United States. And Detroit was at 1.7 million people, and then is now around 700,000 people. So even though we are now, or have been, a prominent diverse economy in California, our cities, we could also decline as well. Cities go through those cycles throughout centuries. And so to not just rest on laurels, but prepare for and help support ways to sustain a diverse and thriving economy for the workforce, for the people.
Would your advice be different to somebody maybe a few years along in their career, or maybe in the middle of their career? A set of survival skills, it can be a tough profession. Or is it similar advice?
Well, professionally, I think it's very important throughout your career to, and especially now, to try to learn the new technologies that are used to apply, and not just rely on, oh, well, that's something the younger people will know, and I don't need to know that. It's changing so rapidly, and it's changed the practice of planning. And I know, for my field in consulting, we were valuable because we had a lot of information that other people didn't have, and so we could use that and apply it to develop plans. Well, now people can get a lot of that information with just a click on their phone, and come up with their own strategies and ideas.
What do you see as the value of a professional organization like APA?
To help, I think, for the professions, to help keep the professions apprised of changes that are happening that people may not be aware of because they're so busy with their jobs, and providing information of the innovations that are occurring around the country, but around globally now. And so when I was in grad school, I interned with a national columnist, Neil Pierce, who was one of the few national columnists out of Washington who wrote mostly about local governments around the country and communities and what they were doing in terms of innovation. And his point of view was that innovation and creativity comes from the local communities, because those are the laboratories, and there are thousands and thousands of them. And we should be learning from each other. So I think that's a role APA can play. Also, APA can play, and I was national president of APA for a couple of years, is to communicate planning with the general public. So I'm not one to think there is a speaker of planning. I think the members of APA are the leaders of planning, and citizens, just people, whether they're, even if they're not planners professionally, are planners. Most people have some opinion about their community and what should be done, and concerns about their quality of life and their families.
So true. Well, that being said, in your leadership role, in both of them, what has been kind of your biggest accomplishment? What have you been most proud of?
Well, at APA, I came up through APA, not through the state chapter, but through the divisions, and so I was chair of the Economic Development Division, and now active with the International Division and Sustainability Division as well. One of the things I tried to do when I was president was to elevate the role of the divisions as thought leaders and resources for APA and its members. And we as a board, we came up with lists of questions that we charged the divisions to prepare reports and address things like technology and planning, sustainability. We started the sustainability division. And we would raise questions that wasn't just charged to a single division, but was charged to multiple divisions to address, because we knew it took multiple perspectives to address the question or the issue. So I really was proud of that our board decided to kind of elevate the role of divisions in APA.
Thinking more about the California chapter, what do you think we should be looking forward to, or what should we be focusing on over the next few years?
I would say there's a lot of change going on, things happening nationally, of course, that affect us, and how to be creative in planning, respecting the local context and decisions. So how to be, I think, resilient as a state, but learning from how we apply that in a San Diego versus a Fresno versus a San Francisco or the Sierras is all very different. Los Angeles, it's all very different, and recognizing that and learning from each other. So I think thinking about those different futures, and that there isn't a single future for the states, it's multiple futures, and how to be more resilient in terms of the environment, but also our economic resiliency, because I do think there's areas where we're vulnerable.
So you were one of the first, if not the first, Asian American president of APA nationally. What was that experience like for you?
Well, more in my practice, being half Filipino. My mother was a immigrant after World War II. Met my dad in the Philippines, and they married there and came back. So on her side, I have appreciation for the immigrant generation, but she was of the generation to assimilate. So it wasn't the focus on maintaining the heritage that is really an appropriate way to thinking about culture. And on my dad's side, the Anderson, that family has been here since the 1750s, from Scotland, and Scotland, English, German, French, and but in a particular county in Georgia, and until my dad was the rebel to move to California. So I have a lot of respect and have worked on plans focused on Asian communities, and for the clients, advising them that there is no such thing as an Asian community. Asian is diverse. There are a lot of different heritages that we consider Asian. Even Filipino is challenging because as a kid I didn't know, well, is Filipino Asian or is it Pacific Islander or is it South Pacific? I mean, it's 7,000 plus islands. Is it Latino? It was a Spanish colony for several hundred years. So I'm really interested in the diversity of what comprises cultures and how they change. And I think the Asian background, I've been active in a group that's trying to get formed as a division in APA as the Asian Pacific Islander group. But reminding ourselves that that's comprised of many different types of nationalities and ethnicities and races to become Asian. For APA itself, I think it's a case of conveying to planners around the country how Asian communities might be different in terms of expectations and culture and priorities, family priorities or individual priorities, and Asians often would be clustered in communities that are a majority some other ethnicity or race. And so how does that work in terms of planning and the importance of reaching out? Early in my career, we had a project that the city of San Diego hired us to prepare an economic development strategy for what they called an Asian community here in Linda Vista. And because we knew that, okay, they had Vietnamese, they had Hmong, they had Cambodian, Laotians, Filipino, Chinese, that it wasn't an Asian community, it was a community comprised of many of these folks from these different backgrounds. So we put on our team a cultural anthropologist from San Diego State, and she interviewed leaders and people from the different communities with the basic question, because a lot of them, particularly from Southeast Asia, were recent immigrants. As you grow economically, do you grow as a community? Do you stay in place and grow your community economically? Or is your focus your family and you move on to other places for the benefit of your family? And it was interesting to see the differences and responses we got from that. So incorporating that kind of research into the planning process when you're working with multi-ethnic communities, I think it becomes very important.
With your work with the city of San Diego, you managed a very large department. What was that like? What were the challenges you faced? Can you just tell us a bit more about that experience?
Well, while I was very familiar with San Diego, the city as a client, and also having been a planning commissioner for 8 years and chaired the planning commission, but working within city government, it's a very steep learning curve, partly because of the diversity of responsibilities. Planners, we think that we are the ones that are thinking about the future of the city, and we're very, very important. And then you go to an all-staff meeting with the thousands of employees, and you realize the planners are like 1% of all the staff and people who work in city government delivering services. And so the mayor, he once said to me, Bill, for 150 people, smallest department, you guys generate the most controversy of any department. And I told him, well, Mayor, and he used to be the former police chief, and I said, well, Mayor, that's the nature of the profession. I think the one of the challenges is breaking down silos, which is true with large organizations generally, private as well as public. And so working how to come together in a hierarchical structure. The other is I came from the private side, where in the private side we were encouraged to create, challenge, innovate, make mistakes. And I observed there was less of that in the city. Mistakes you make privately in a private organization can stay private often, and public organization become very public and embarrassing for the leaders. I had to encourage the staff, and especially the junior staff and senior staff, to when we had a meeting to discuss an issue, to challenge each other. Mm-hmm. Usually, initially, I noticed everyone was very quiet until I spoke and expressed my opinion, mm-hmm. rather than, no, express your opinion, or you're a landscape architect, why can this person challenge me if they're not a landscape architect? Well, because they come from a different perspective, and vice versa. Why can a landscape architect challenge an engineer? And have that kind of robust conversation to come up with a strategy.
So APA has put an emphasis on ethics, diversity, and sustainability at the past few conferences. What do you think the challenges we're facing in that area and into the future?
Well, in terms of ethics, ethics is always something we need to pay attention to. And inculcate a philosophy of being ethical in the way we practice. I think what's challenging is what are the practices with each generation, because the bucket of ethical role models can vary over time. Mm. And especially I worry about sometimes the younger people are influenced by what are the ethical standards when mm-hmm. they entered a profession, and not knowing the history of change. And so we have to keep reminding ourselves about that as we go forward. And also for us more seasoned, older planners, to remind ourselves that we can always learn. Because sometimes we fall into maybe practices that might be borderline if we don't remind ourselves of these ethical principles.
Kind of speaking about the generational difference, AI has become quite prevalent in planning lately. Mm-hmm. What are the challenges or maybe even opportunities that you see coming up in the next few years?
Well, in some regard, it can make the planning practice more efficient. Mm-hmm. It's certainly easier to collect information. And I think in certain regards, even apply strategies that have incorporated the common wealth of information to a more effective strategy or outcome quickly, right? But I think the concern I have is that AI might lead us to common denominator planning, mm-hmm. and that in the pursuit of efficiency or reduced budgets, to just take an approach that seems to be generally fine for a lot of places and lose that art of planning that takes into account the particular context and situation that you're in. The other is, over time, sometimes that, especially groups that might challenge planning, is the use of AI to change history and the truth. And it can be done that way, and especially to communicate to the general public who may not be as aware of some of these facts, and that would make our the planning practice, I think, more challenging. So,
can you speak a bit more about the political diversity in the topic of sustainability?
Yes, within California, it's more diverse than sometimes we appreciate. But when I was APA president, I had the pleasure of being invited to speak at different state chapters around the country. And my very first month as APA president, my very first state conference was the Alabama chapter. And the Alabama public employees, planners, at the time were discouraged by their governments to use the term sustainability, which was odd for me coming from California, where we had sustainability in our laws as a term. And so the theme of their conference was healthy communities. And they had as co-sponsors the American Public Health Association and AARP, the American Association of Retired People. At the end of the month, I spoke at the Oregon conference. And at the Oregon conference, they were celebrating the 40th anniversary of their urban limit lines and their sustainable planning practices, and talking about what are we going to do for the next 40 years. And the motivation was to protect the world, the earth, and how can planning do that. So very different brackets in terms of approaches to planning. Well, what was interesting to me was when I went to the sessions on town planning, they were both proposing the same techniques and strategies. Walkable neighborhoods, bikeable neighborhoods, excuse me, design context, greening, the importance of parks and open space. In Alabama, they were doing it from the perspective of creating healthier outcomes for the public. And in Oregon, it was to save the earth. And so you can approach a challenge from different perspectives to reach the same outcomes, but being mindful of the political and cultural differences in which that happens to be effective.
So you were both a practicing planner and a planning commissioner. Can you kind of speak about some of the similarities and differences in the role and what those two different roles were like?
Well, when I was a planning commissioner, I was a private sector planner, consultant. And we were an activist planning commission at the time, and multidisciplinary. And we were, Gail Goldberg, whom you've interviewed, was the planning director, and we were working with them on recognizing that we needed to update our general plan. It was about time, but more importantly, a recognition that the city was transitioning from a city of growing by growing out to land development and suburbanization for 230 years to seeing a future where we'll have built out and planned and most of our greenfield areas, so it was going to be a future of more infill development and urbanization. And that was a different set of planning tools and challenges. And Gail, in her wisdom, took the perspective that before we start an official general plan, we had to have a 2-year conversation with the public that she referred to as the strategic framework. And that led to the notion of a city of villages and the diversity of contexts within the city of San Diego. And then that led to a general plan that she, during her tenure, prepared a first draft. Then she went to LA. The mayor asked me to be planning director, and we worked with that. There were some changes in state law, such as AB 32, the first climate law, that we had to incorporate. And then, with my economics background, wanted to make some changes to the economic prosperity element, things like that, and prepared the general plan. I joke that as planning commissioner, I had a perspective of planning, and then as planning director, I learned how we were managed as planning commissioners by planning staff, so, which wasn't really true, but it was a little bit of that. And so, so it was as a commissioner, you don't have the constraints of being an employee, and so we are freer to challenge more things publicly and raise issues and be assertive that way, while as a staff and director and in a management position, having to be mindful of how this may influence the practices of our colleagues in other departments and our bosses who were the electeds and the mayor. And so, so that took some adjustment.
That's all my questions.
Okay,
Thank you so much
sure.
for coming in and speaking with me.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.